Chumley, Rick Harrison's longtime close friend and colleague, has spoken out for the first time about a heartbreaking event that took place in prison, where Rick is facing serious criminal charges. In an emotional interview, Chumley revealed that Rick became the target of a brutal attack, allegedly carried out by his former associates. This incident not only shocked Chumley but also raised many questions about loyalty, betrayal, and the dark relationships that have been tied to Rick throughout his life. With mixed emotions, Chumley recalls the details of the incident, opening a new dark chapter in the story of the man who was once an icon in the world of Pawn Stars. If you find these stories truly thought-provoking and touching, don't forget to leave a comment with the number 1 if you sympathize with Rick Harrison and Chumley, witnessed, or resonate with this emotional journey, or number 0 if you have a different opinion. Please like and share so your friends can follow this story as well. For Rick Harrison, the infamous face behind Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, and the star of the hit reality TV series Pawn Stars, the cameras have long since stopped rolling. The silence in prison is far more deafening than any scene from the director's chair. The sound of metal doors slamming shut, the constant violence from prison guards, and the whispered threats from neighboring inmates now make up the new soundtrack to Rick's life. But even more condemning than the steel bars and concrete are the whispers on the other side of those walls. Because amidst all this chaos, Rick's longtime friend, co-star and business partner, Chumley, has finally broken his silence. What he has to say could change the entire narrative. Chumley is not just an ordinary reality TV personality to Pawn Stars fans. He's the funny character, the lovable companion who doesn't always get things right but brings warmth and humanity to the show. However, in real life, Chumley knows a different side of Rick Harrison, one that is colder and more calculating. After Rick's attack in prison, Chumley's voice now carries a weight it never had before. The world is still questioning why Rick Harrison was attacked in prison, and more importantly, who gave the order. The rumors that started as whispers in the dark corners of online forums have now become headlines on news channels. Rick Harrison is cooperating with federal authorities. The informant has been thrown into prison. The star of Pawn Stars is now naming names in the federal investigation. But behind every sensational headline lies a story far darker than anything viewers could imagine. According to those close to the case, Rick Harrison didn't just go to prison for money laundering and human trafficking. He went in with the clear understanding that he had many names to trade. The kind of names that make federal agents lean forward in their chairs. Names that could dismantle a decades-long operation involving offshore accounts, hidden tunnels, and unimaginable human suffering. It was a dark turning point in a story that began with a pawn shop and ended in blood. But the story didn't start with federal operations. It didn't even start with Rick's arrest. No, this story begins in the most unexpected place. On an old couch inside a warehouse in Las Vegas, surrounded by rare coins, dusty antiques, and a film crew thinking they were shooting a wholesome, family-friendly show. At that time, Rick Harrison was the undisputed king of the resale world, with his deep voice and sharp wit. He was the expert, the fixer, the one who knew how to close a deal, even if it meant bending a few rules. But that hunger for deals, power, and control didn't stop at the pawn shop. According to what Chumlee revealed, Rick's ambitions went far beyond the counter. Behind the walls of his successful empire, Rick had other businesses, secret partnerships, shady deals, and relationships that no one on set dared to ask too many questions about. For years, Chumlee maintained that he would lower his head and smile when Rick joked, nodding when Rick closed big deals. But something changed. The day Rick looked him straight in the eye and boasted about shipping products across state lines, not jewelry, not antiques, but something else entirely. That was the day Chumlee said he felt sick, and it was the day he began to see Rick differently. Yet even then he remained silent, afraid. Afraid of being implicated. Afraid of losing everything he had built. Afraid that Rick's empire was bigger, darker, and better protected than anyone could understand. It wasn't until Rick was arrested, and even more chilling, brutally beaten in prison, that Chumlee decided to speak out. Because in prison, the rules change. Inside those walls, past sins are not buried. They become currency. As for Rick, the guilt is immense. If he thought naming names would help him get a reduced sentence, he had forgotten one crucial thing. Those names belong to powerful men. According to leaked documents and anonymous sources from prison staff, these men have soldiers on the inside, men who can and will fight back. Rick Harrison didn't just endure a random brawl in prison, it was orchestrated, timed, and calculated as punishment. The type of attack carried a clear message. You betrayed us, you opened your mouth, and now it's bleeding. The ones who attacked him weren't strangers. They were people he had dined with. Business associates, traffickers, the very men who had shaken his hand to sign contracts. Written in silence with blood, the consequences of that attack were what pushed Chumlee to the brink of what he saw in the hospital photo. Rick's swollen face, bruised with one eye almost completely shut, stitches across his forehead. That wasn't justice, it was a settling of debts. After years of bearing the weight of secrets, Chumlee decided that silence was no longer an option. He provided an exclusive insight into Rick's double life, revealing how the pawn shop was allegedly used to launder money. Through fake appraisals, like the human trafficking routes casually discussed among slaves, a woman once confided in Chumlee that Rick owned far more than just inventory. But the most chilling part wasn't the details. It was the tone in Chumlee's voice. Not just sad, but angry, betrayed, horrified. When someone he once called a brother could operate with such blatant disregard for human life, and perhaps even more concerning, Rick had never shown any remorse, according to Chumlee. Rick spoke about his crimes not as mistakes, but as achievements, strategies, smart business moves, and more than anything else, this is what ultimately broke Chumlee's loyalty, leaving no way back. Now the federal government is listening, the public is watching, and Rick Harrison, whether he gets out of prison or not, will never again be the man millions once admired on television. This story isn't about fame. It's about corrupt power and a moral collapse so deep that it took greed, betrayal, and bloodshed to finally rise to the surface. There is still one question. Is Rick Harrison really the mastermind? Or is he just a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game? That is what this investigation will uncover. In the upcoming chapters, we will explore the evidence, testimonies, and the silent looks. We will see who benefits, who loses, and what secrets are buried beneath the bright lights of Las Vegas. And in the end, one truth will become painfully clear. Not all pawns can be saved before the arrest photos, prison bars, and the federal whispers of treason take hold. Rick Harrison is the face of the American dream, or at least on TV. With his signature smirk, raspy voice, and sharp negotiation skills, he turned a dusty pawn shop in downtown Las Vegas into a household name. But the truth behind that rise, how he climbed so high and fell so fast, is more than just a success story. It became a scandal. It's a story of ambition, deception, and a downward spiral so steep that it shook even those closest to him in his orbit. Rick Harrison was born in Las Vegas, Nevada on March 22, 1965, a city where fortune can be made or lost in the blink of an eye. That energy has never left his blood. He learned the art of business as a teenager, selling fake Gucci bags out of the trunk of his car. It wasn't about style, but about profit. This initial glimpse into how quickly money could be made, with a sharp eye and the right voice, became the guiding principle for his future business endeavors. When Rick partnered with his father, Richard Oldman Harrison, to run Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in 1989, it was not just a family venture, but a calculated gamble in the heart of Las Vegas. The city was filled with desperate gamblers, transient tourists, and dreamers, all of whom needed quick cash. The pawn shop became a sanctuary for the poor, the brave, and the destitute. Rick understood this and built his empire on that very chaos. For many years, the shop operated just like any other in town, with quiet transactions, lost wedding rings, and classic baseball cards. But Rick had a vision. He knew Las Vegas was not just a city, it was a stage, and he was ready to become a star. In 2009, that dream came true when History Channel launched Pawn Stars, a show that became an instant hit. Viewers tuned in weekly to watch Rick, his son Corey, and the bumbling Chumley negotiate everything from samurai swords to space shuttle debris. But the real magic wasn't in the items themselves, it was in the personalities. Rick positioned himself as the consummate expert, the man who always knew when someone was lying. Behind every smirk was a calculating mind, always measuring the moment and manipulating it to his advantage. But fame has a funny way of distorting everything. Success came with wealth. Wealth brought attention, and with attention came access to circles Rick had never been part of before. Exclusive private clubs, deep-pocketed investors, and shadowy agendas. That's where the real story began to change. Because while the cameras showed Rick trading antique weapons, there was far more happening behind the scenes. Documents from the Civil War indicate that those close to Rick Harrison claim his interests off-camera became much darker. According to some former pawn shop employees, the shop began to transform into a front not just for legal antiques, but also for items that were hard to trace and lacked clear ownership. These items could disappear from the inventory without raising suspicion, creating a second economy behind the scenes. The rumors grew louder over time, with private meetings in the back office and conversations abruptly stopping when someone else entered the room. Associates, whom no one in the group recognized, came and went under the cover of darkness. But on television, Rick still maintained his calm, composed, and cunning demeanor. Rick's relationships began to deteriorate. His son, Corey, grew distant, and Chumley, once cheerful, started to miss filming sessions. Even the fans began to notice that the glamour was fading. The deals became colder, the smiles less genuine. It wasn't just the fatigue of fame, but the weight of something far heavier than viewership ratings or royalty checks. In 2022, the whispers turned into noise when the FBI quietly began investigating Rick's business dealings. The initial tax evasion investigation reportedly uncovered a complex network of offshore accounts, suspicious money transfers, and connections to known human traffickers. The gold and silver pawn shop, once a quirky tourist stop, was now seen as the center of a much larger criminal enterprise. When federal agents arrived with search warrants, the fate was sealed. Rick's arrest shocked the public. He was charged with money laundering, human trafficking, and organized crime. Prosecutors described him as the architect of a criminal enterprise operating right under everyone's noses. Along with the charm that had made him famous, it was now being used against him, showcasing manipulation, misdirection, and intention. However, what shocked the nation wasn't just the arrest, but the calm with which Rick handled it. He didn't panic. There was no public breakdown, just a mugshot with pursed lips and a silence that spoke volumes. Informants say that the silence wasn't stoicism, but strategy. After his detention, Rick began negotiating not with inmates, but with prosecutors. He knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, and some speculated, literally, and he was ready to talk. What followed was a storm that no one could have predicted. Some of Rick's former business partners were arrested. An asset hidden outside of Las Vegas was raided. The most chilling development, however, was that some of the victims of human trafficking spoke out, naming Rick and his family as facilitators of a network that exploited vulnerable individuals for profit. Rick Harrison was once the epitome of entrepreneurial spirit on television, but now he stands accused as the leader of a human trafficking ring. Audiences quickly shifted, social media exploded, and fans and celebrities alike began deleting old episodes from their DVRs. Sponsors pulled out, and reruns were quietly removed from streaming platforms. History Channel issued a brief statement, distancing itself from the scandal, calling Rick's actions deeply concerning and in no way reflecting the values of the network. As the outside world crumbled, the world inside the prison proved to be even more dangerous. Rumors spread that Rick had cooperated with federal authorities, a claim that remained uncertain. In prison, being labeled a snitch is essentially a death sentence. According to internal prison reports, Rick was targeted within weeks of his incarceration. He was moved between cells and placed in protective custody, but that was not enough. The attack occurred on a Tuesday, sources revealed, with Rick being lured into a hallway under the pretense of a meeting, where he was ambushed, beaten, stomped on, and left unconscious. Guards found him lying in a pool of blood with a broken jaw, fractured ribs, and swollen eyes. That was not a random act. It was an act of vengeance. The message was crystal clear. Silence is survival. Speaking out will get you killed. Yet, Rick continued to cooperate. Or at least, that's the rumor. Officially, both the prison and federal prosecutors have not confirmed the incident. The level of cooperation from informants continues to rise, but what cannot be denied is the impact of the numerous arrests, more assets being seized, and more people turning against Rick. Figures like Chumley are both ironic and ruthless. Rick, the man who built an empire from the desperation of others, now finds himself completely dependent on the very system he once believed he could outsmart. His rise was swift, but his fall has been catastrophic. However, the story is far from over. As more people step forward, more secrets are being revealed. Chumley's revelations are drawing attention. The true story behind Rick Harrison's empire is slowly coming to light, including how it was built, who was destroyed in the process, and what will happen next. The pawn shop may have closed, but the calculations have only just begun. The investigation into Rick Harrison's empire did not begin with a bang, and it didn't even start with Rick himself. It began with a single, anonymous complaint, one that was almost overlooked. A young woman in her 20s, whose name is still protected under federal confidentiality laws, stepped forward. A report sent to a non-profit organization in Las Vegas, dedicated to helping human trafficking victims, detailed how the woman had been sold like an object through channels linked to a high-ranking figure, referred to only as the man on TV. At first, the intake team didn't think much of it. Complaints involving celebrities were rare and often didn't lead to any results. However, this woman not only had a compensation claim, but also provided detailed information: names, phone numbers, addresses, transaction records, and enough photos to make even the most skeptical federal agents stop in their tracks. The report was forwarded to the Department of Homeland Security, and they quickly marked it for further review. As agents dug deeper, a troubling pattern emerged. The listed addresses matched properties owned by shell companies, all traced back to Rick Harrison. The businesses were registered through multiple layers of legal camouflage. Offshore accounts and LLCs were secured with names, but they didn't exist. Parent companies had ties to former production assistants and sales staff from Pawn Stars. On paper, everything seemed normal, but in reality, it reeked of concealment. If you find the story of Rick Harrison and the dark secrets behind his career truly fascinating, don't forget to hit like and share this video so everyone can discover it. Leave your thoughts in the comments section and let us know what you think about this story. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on exciting videos and intriguing truths that we'll continue to share. Let's explore untold secrets together and make sure no one misses out on this important information. The FBI got involved and began a covert surveillance operation to stay out of the public eye. Agents posing as tourists visited the gold and silver pawn shop, made purchases, and recorded conversations. They monitored the inventory system and thoroughly checked shipping records. What they found confirmed their growing suspicions. Large sums of money were being transferred from pawn shop accounts to shady overseas accounts with no clear purpose. In particular, unregistered items, things that had never appeared on the show, were never entered into the official inventory, but were clearly still being sold. These weren't just red flags. They were torches burning against a pitch-black sky. Still, it was the human element that ultimately broke the case wide open. A second victim came forward, followed by a third. One of them claimed she had worked as a courier for Rick's side business. At first, she believed she was delivering items for a discreet resale service, until she realized she was transporting underage minors from one location to another. When she tried to leave, she was threatened. Her story matched details from the first victim. Their timelines overlapped, and the names they provided were aliases of the same men they had encountered. Discoveries began to surface. At this point, the FBI had gathered enough evidence to launch a formal investigation. They obtained subpoenas for Rick's financial records and acquired surveillance footage of properties linked to him, including a warehouse not far from Las Vegas. What they found inside shocked even the most seasoned agents. Multiple bedrooms hidden behind false walls, security cameras facing inward rather than out, door locks positioned on the outside, and secret compartments containing fake passports and burner phones. This was no longer a theory. It had become a human trafficking hub, and Rick Harrison, the man once seen smiling behind a glass counter trading antique watches, was at the center of it all. To build a solid case, the FBI needed evidence that directly linked Rick to these operations. That's when they began flipping informants. Disgruntled former employees, associates, even ex-lovers were quietly approached, one by one. And they began to talk. A former assistant who worked with Rick during the 4th season of the show claimed that she was asked to help forge documents related to the appraisal of antiques. However, those documents were later used to cover up illegal transactions. A maintenance worker confessed to installing a lift floor and a high-end wired security system at one of Rick's rental properties. Another former employee claimed that Rick paid him $1,500 in cash to disappear after he accidentally walked into one of the deliveries. It had nothing to do with antiques. Then came the bank records. Dozens of wire transfers were sent to bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, routed through Switzerland, and ultimately redirected to an operation in Venezuela. An operation that, at first glance, seemed to not even exist. It appeared to be tax evasion, but further analysis revealed that these transactions aligned with known human trafficking activities in the region. Rick wasn't just hiding money, he was also accused of funding the movement of people under the guise of the antique business. The evidence is clear, but the federal government wants more than that. They want Rick himself. So they set up a sting operation using an undercover informant, a former business associate who had turned on him when faced with his own charges. The agents convinced Rick to attend a private meeting at a luxury hotel, under the impression that a foreign investor wanted to funnel money through his store. The conversation was... Rick didn't hide anything. He spoke confidently, and even boasted about moving weight in ways that the federal agents had never imagined. The term moving weight was used deliberately. Rick had learned the language of the underground world, but when he said, "It would be easier when they're young and scared," the entire room seemed to freeze. It was a moment within 24 hours. Rick Harrison was arrested. The media didn't know until hours later, when a helicopter was seen hovering over his house in Las Vegas. News stations reported that federal agents had seized electronic documents and large sums of cash. By the time Rick was handcuffed and led out of the house, silence enveloped the scene. No statements, no press releases, just the hollow echo of someone who had carefully built a facade, only to watch it collapse in a few seconds in the living room. In court, the prosecutors laid it all out. Human trafficking victims, money laundering operations, coded language, hidden bank accounts, fake passports, assets used as detention centers. They argued that the program had become a cover, a way to hide from scrutiny. Rick's defense team tried to argue in court. They claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that Rick was playing a character, exaggerating, embellishing the legend of Pawn Stars, but the evidence was too clear. Too specific, too matter-of-fact. The judge denied bail. As soon as the verdict was handed down, Rick's demeanor changed. The confident smile disappeared. What emerged was a colder calculation. And that's when the feds said Rick made his move. He offered to cooperate, He said he had dozens of names, not just local dealers and transporters, but politicians, law enforcement, media executives who were said to have helped keep the operation hush-hush. In return, he wanted a lighter sentence, the best protection being solitary confinement to avoid retaliation. Federal prosecutors agreed to listen but made no promises. Meanwhile, the information Rick began to provide set off a chain reaction, with raids being conducted in Arizona, New Mexico, and even as far away as Florida. Some of the names he gave were already on federal watch lists. Others were ghosts, notorious gamblers whose whereabouts had so far been unproven. But in prison, word traveled fast, and the men Rick had accused had friends, they had connections, and they had memories. That's when the attack happened. Rick's cooperation, once seen as his golden ticket to escape, became his target. The same charm that had made him famous now made him a traitor. As news of his treatment by the prison system spread, violence erupted. By the end of his second month in federal prison, Rick Harrison had become a man isolated in every way. The senses of the word. His empire has crumbled, his allies have turned against him, and his body, now scarred by the attack, bears the weight of his choices. But the investigation is far from over. As each day more names emerge, more victims are brought to light, and more lies are exposed. The man who once bargained for baseball cards is now accused of selling people's lives, and as the investigation deepens, it becomes clear that Rick Harrison has mastered the art of deception, not only in business, but in life. When the news broke that Rick Harrison had been arrested for money laundering and human trafficking, the public was stunned. But no one felt the impact more personally or painfully than that Austin Chumley Russell was more than Rick's TV co-star. He was family in every way but blood. Their relationship had lasted decades. They had shared laughter, fame, and fortune, but now Chumley stared at the headlines, unable to comprehend how the man who had once been his mentor was now... For Chumley, it was more than just disbelief. It was devastating. At first, he refused to comment as reporters swarmed the gold and silver pawn shop. He kept his doors locked, his blinds drawn, and his phone on silent. The paparazzi camped outside his house. Fans messaged him on social media, demanding answers. Yes, he knew. He could have been involved. The weight of public suspicion nearly killed him. He went bankrupt privately. Still, Chumley was devastated. He had always admired Rick, not just as a boss, but as someone who had changed his life. Before the show, Chumley was a nobody. He worked part-time at a pawn shop, doing odd jobs, never really seeing him as someone with potential. But Rick saw something in him, or at least pretended to. He encouraged Chumley to get in front of the camera to exaggerate his awkwardness, played a comedic role that the audience would love, and it worked. Pawn stars exploded in popularity, and so did Chumley's fame. He became a cultural icon, admired by millions for his easygoing charm, innocent confidence, and endearing laugh. But behind the camera, he grew more mature as he learned from Rick West, which is what he thought in the early days. After Rick was arrested, Chumley started looking back at everything. Every conversation, every closed-door meeting, every suspicious moment that he had missed at the time. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized how many red flags had been missed. There was the time Rick asked him to sign for a shipment that never arrived at the store, which Rick explained was a private deal with a buyer in Dubai. or the time Rick asked him to pick up a package at a private airstrip and told him not to ask any questions. Chumley had joked about it at the time, something on a poster, but Rick didn't laugh. He just looked at him and said, "The less you know, the safer you are." And then there were the disappearances, the people who had entered Rick's orbit and then never appeared again. Interns, assistants, salespeople. There was one woman who made an impression on Chumley. She was young, quiet, and incredibly sharp, handling scheduling and logistics for a few months before she abruptly quit. When Chumley asked why, she simply said, "I saw something I shouldn't have." He remembered how distressed she looked, pale, tense, but again he ignored it. In the world of television, people come and go all the time. He saw things differently now. But what broke him the most wasn't the evidence against Rick, but the memory of a conversation that had haunted him ever since. It had happened during the show's 7th season. The crew had finished filming early that day, and Rick had invited Chumley to his house for a drink. They were sitting on Rick's back porch, with the Las Vegas skyline in front of them. Vegas flashed behind them as Rick, slightly drunk, leaned over and said something that made Chumley's hair stand on end. He knew the store was just a facade. The real money was in what he couldn't see. Chumley laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Rick didn't laugh. He looked into the night and said, "There are two kinds of people in this world, those who know and those who are familiar. I decided a long time ago which one I wanted to be." Chumley didn't ask what he meant. She didn't want to know. Now, years later, she wished she had pressed for an answer. In the days after Rick's arrest, Chumley had completely isolated herself. He stopped going to the store. He cut off contact with Corey, who was dealing with her father's demise in her own way. Even close friends say Chumley seemed like a shadow of himself, haunted, withdrawn, almost fearful. He didn't talk to the media. He didn't post on social media. Instead, he opened up an old notebook he used to carry around in the early seasons of the show. He began writing everything down, every shady transaction, every casual comment, every strange instruction from Rick. It wasn't just a purge, it was a record, a timeline of moments that, when put together, painted a picture far darker than he'd ever imagined. And then came the night that changed everything. Chumley got a call from a mutual friend, someone who was still close to Rick and had visited him in prison. The call was short, direct, and cold. They'd caught up with him. Not the same person, and he said he was naming names. "Everyone is nervous, are you too? You should be when the real fear sets in." Chumley realized that she was not just a bystander. Whether she liked it or not, she was part of the story. Even if she had nothing to do with Rick's crimes, even if she never knowingly participated, her name was forever tied to Rick's. And if Rick named names, then no one knew what he might say, or what others might assume. So Chumley made a decision. For the first time since the story broke, she decided to speak. Not to clear her name. He has not been formally charged with anything, but to tell the truth. His truth in an emotional, private interview, recorded and later leaked to a reporter. Chumley's voice broke as he said, "Not because he was scared, but because he was devastated. I admired him," he said. "Chumley, I swear. I thought he was a smart, shrewd businessman." I think he cared about us for the store, for the show. But somewhere along the way, he stopped being Rick and became someone I didn't recognize. She went on to describe the moments she buried, the way Rick casually spoke of people as property, the times Rick bragged about getting away with things the feds could never prove. Paranoia seemed to creep into Rick's behavior in the later seasons of the show. Chumlee admitted she had her suspicions, but she also admitted she was afraid to ask, afraid of losing what they had built, the fame, the success, the sisterhood. And maybe that made me weak, she added. Or maybe it did. Make me an accomplice. I didn't know all I knew was that I should have asked more questions. The interview ends with a disturbing question. If I had known then what I know now, I would have walked away and never looked back. The interview quickly went viral, with fans flooding social media with messages of support and questions. Was Chumlee really as naive as he claimed? Or did he know more than he was letting on? He was just trying to get ahead of the consequences. Regardless, one thing is clear. Chumlee's world has been shattered. The man she once admired is now a disgraced ghost, broken and buried behind the walls that protected him for so long. And for Chumlee, the reckoning is just beginning. Inside the walls of a federal prison, there is no celebrity, no fans, no Pawn Stars reruns to remind other inmates that Rick Harrison was once a household name. Gone were the designer clothes and the media image. Now he walked the halls in a faded orange jumpsuit, indistinguishable from the thousands of men who had shared his fate. No one noticed the irony. A man who had built an empire by valuing the past and trading the future was now just a number in a system that cared little about who got out. From the moment Rick walked through the prison doors, it was clear that this would not be a light or easy sentence. He wasn't just a financial criminal in prison for tax fraud or securities violations. His charges, money laundering, extortion, and most seriously, human trafficking, had made him a target for discrimination in the prison system. Few things carry a heavier social death sentence than crimes involving the exploitation of women and children. And worse, Rick was rumored to have said that prison was the nail in the coffin. The first few days passed quickly. During his admission, his medical evaluation, his processing, Rick spoke little, observed much, but even he was a silent presence. The guards knew who he was, and so did many of the other inmates. And fame, however fleeting it may be, will quickly make you a target if it doesn't come with power or alliances. Rick had neither. He came in alone, and worse, he carried with him the scent of betrayal, something more dangerous than any conviction. He was assigned to a cell in D Block, a unit known for holding non-violent criminals awaiting transfer. At first, he seemed manageable. The guards took him for granted. They kept a close eye on the inmates, most of whom cautiously approached him with sly smiles and indirect comments like, "Hey, Star, how long have you been here?" Rick responded with practiced laughter, trying to blend in, but everyone could see he was retreating under the weight of his own notoriety. Ultimately, the attack on Rick Harrison in prison has opened up a previously unknown dark corner of the empire he built. Chumlee, once a close friend and colleague, is now forced to confront the truth about what Rick has done and the dangerous relationships he has forged. The actions of his fellow prisoners are not just punishment, but a clear message. Everything has a price. If you find this story shocking and want to continue to discover the secrets behind it, don't forget to like and share this video for everyone to follow. Leave your comments below this video. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this incident. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on interesting videos and never-before-revealed stories. Together, we will continue to discover shocking truths and secrets behind famous names.